and welcome to our webinar tonight. We're so excited to be continuing our series of webinars with Nasco Education. And we are joined tonight, of course, by an amazing educator from South Dakota who is going to be sharing some information on lessons that she helped develop for Nasco. And we are going to be talking about 4 different lesson plans that she worked on with us this summer. The AFNR section of Nasco Education is something that we have a long history in and are really proud of. So actually our company of Nasco Education was founded by an agricultural educator back in the 1940s. So it's a long legacy for us, but it's something that we haven't always been curating. So we're excited to get back into really looking and figuring out a way to help better serve our agriculture educators and our AFNR teachers. So this is kind of our first step, our first series of lesson plans in a number of waves that we are going to be releasing in the coming years, partnering, of course, with teachers like Mercedes, who thank you so much for joining us today, Mercedes. Before we
you're welcome. Thank you.
No problem. Before we get to the content, though, I do like to talk about a couple housekeeping things. So in GoToWebinar, there is a question box. If you have any questions out throughout the webinar, please do type those in there. I will then voice those to Mercedes towards the end of the webinar if any questions do come in. Or if they're specific about the lesson plan, we will kind of sprinkle them throughout to wrap it in with the conversation as it is relevant. Also, the 4 lesson plans we will be talking about are attached within the handouts on the toolbar. So if you see a section that says handouts and 4 of them, those are the 4 lesson plans that we will be discussing today. And I'll be pulling those up for Mercedes as we talk our way through those. And then also at the end of our webinar tonight, there will be a survey that launches. So if you take the survey, we always appreciate your feedback. And about an hour after this ends, everyone who is attending live will be getting an automated certificate that says, you attended the webinar. If you need certificates of completion for any educational requirements, that is provided. And there's also going to be a recording of this. So if you want to go back ever and reference what Mercedes was saying about these lesson plans, that will be available to you at any point that you would like. So now, without any further ado, I want to officially introduce Mercedes. Mercedes is a 3rd-year agriculture education instructor at Gettysburg High School in Gettysburg, South Dakota. She teaches grades 9 through 12 in a 1-teacher program, and she's completed her undergraduate studies at the South Dakota State University. So we're very excited and lucky to have partnered with Mercedes throughout the summer. And I'm going to welcome her now and pass the torch over to her to share these great, insightful ideas.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. Just a few housekeeping things. We are having some technical difficulties, so when you do hear the audio, if you hear me say, "Hey, Jenny, move the slide forward," it's because on my end, I for some reason can't get in to do that. So, Jenny, if you want to move the slide forward to the first one.
Gladly.
Perfect. So, as Jenny said, I am in my 3rd year of teaching agricultural education at Gettysburg High School. I graduated from SDSU. I currently teach in a 1-teacher program. I teach 9 through 12. I'm hoping to add middle school into my curriculum. Currently, though, I just teach 9 through 12. I have about 35 to 40 students in my program at any given time. My program pretty much has, it says on there 4 pathways, but it's about 3. You're either going to take my plant and animal science classes, or you're going to take my egg structures and egg mechanics, which is really, really shop focused. Besides the education portion of it, we also have a 40-acre crop plot, and then we run a pig project so that the elementary students can raise pigs throughout the summer. So that's a little bit about my program. I am a Minnesota native and moved to South Dakota. Obviously, if you've heard in the news, South Dakota's COVID stuff has been a little bit different this fall. And so I will talk about that as we go through each of the lessons, kind of what the original lesson plan idea was, and then how I have either taken it virtually or how I would take it virtually if I haven't yet. We have been super blessed here at Gettysburg. I have not had to teach virtually at all this year, which I am very, very grateful for. As most of you know, it's way easier to teach in person and have the kids do those hands-on activities. And so that's been very beneficial, but it's always in the back of our minds of when are we going to be online? And I think that's for everybody this year. Nobody really knows any of that. So I'm going to talk about the first lesson that I came up with, which is the commodities lesson. Typically, Jenny, if you want to move the slide forward. Thank you. Okay, so typically I do this lesson right away in the beginning at the fall. This one I will typically do in my freshman AFNR class, very easily to be modified for a state format. And so what they're going to do is they are going to be given a region, and then in each region they're going to have to find specific things. So Jenny, can you pull up the PDF of the commodities? I believe it's the second one right there on the list.
The last one I clicked.
Yep, perfect. So this lesson is something that I started doing during student teaching. And so I do live in a small town, and I don't have very many kids in my program. I'm from a very, very small school. However, kids don't necessarily always know, one, what a commodity is, two, what is grown in the region, or even in the state. And so I have done this both online and in paper format. And so what they're going to do is they're going to look up the different commodities with either in the state or region. I believe the one that's right in front of you is for regions. And I designed this for a bigger class. This is the one that I originally did when I was student teaching, had classes of 30. My freshman ed class this year is 7. And so I had them do this individually. And so what they'll do is you set up specific criteria. For me, I mostly focus my freshman A class the first half of the semester on crops. And so if you scroll down, Jenny, there should be a rubric, I believe, correct, on this one?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. Cool. So if you scroll down, I'm going to ask them, what types of commodities they would be. Explain to me how that commodity is produced. So not only do I want them to tell me that in South Dakota, corn and soybeans is going to be our main crops. I also want them to tell me that cattle and sheep are also grown heavily. I want them to tell me how they're grown, where they're grown, how are they produced. After the seed is produced, what happens to them after. And so they kind of follow this line of lineage of how that corn seed would go from farm to plate. And so if I do this on an in-person version, you will see something similar to the poster that would be on page 2, where I have my students determine those criteria, and then they will color in or identify which areas of the state or region those are in. For this particular group, they did do the states only, but I have done this in regional groups. So, and they did focus specifically on crops. And one of the main reasons why I do have them do this is because it opens up a lot of thinking on the students' parts, very student driven. I will give them the rubric that says your task is to find me the top 5 commodities in the Midwest, and just let them go for it. Obviously there to guide them along the way, but really to, especially since this is one of the first activities that I do, really to see how and what the students know already and what we need to cover. And so again, this can be easily modified to fit any of your classroom needs. I have done this activity in a classes of 30, and I have just did it in my freshman class of 7. And so some of the ways that I do that is, instead of doing regions, you could identify it into states. Also, you could split it into groups or singles. When I had my class of 7, I just had them do it by themselves instead of splitting into group. If you do have a big class, you could have them go smaller and do maybe 3 or 4 groups per region. It really depends on how you want this lesson to work. Another thing, if you are going to go online, this can be very easily modified. I taught this through an LMS. We were in person, but I still had students submit it to me online. And so I've had students create me posters on Canva or PowerPoint, or used a word processor and then submitted it through a learning management system that way. And so that is one way to modify this virtually. But overall, I think this is a great lesson that we could do in person or in person or virtual that way. Any questions so far? I think so.
None have come in yet. So if you do have any as we go, please do type those in the question box, and then I will relay them to Mercedes.
Cool. Okay, we're going to move on to lesson number 2, which is the soil horizons. Actually, this would be broken up into, or we did break this particular lesson up into 2 different versions. And so we have the high school version and we have an elementary version. I'm going to start with the high school version, Jenny.
Okay.
Okay, so I personally have only done this lesson in person. I think there are plenty of ways that we could implement this to do this online. It would just take a little bit of creativity from the teacher. One thing, obviously this is just an idea, one thing would be to maybe have the students go around into their kitchens and see what they can find to make all of the different layers, especially if you aren't going to be there. It might be hard to say you have to have 3 different kinds of pudding, but maybe one of them can find rice and crackers and jello and something else and mix it all together to be able to distinguish each of those layers in between, which would be the A horizon, B horizon, C horizon, and our organic matter. And so what this lesson is we are going to have the students make a model of each of our soil horizons. One thing I do want to say is to make sure that you have all of your supplies in person, if you are doing this in person, ahead of time, and make sure that they are all ready to go. So typically how I do this lesson is as an introduction to our land judging and soils unit. And so I will, right before the unit, I post this picture that you can see on Jenny is looking at right now of the soil layers. And I say, okay, we're going to talk about the soil layers today, and I just give them each of those items. So they'll get their Oreos, they'll get their pudding, they'll get their worms, they'll get their whatever other items that you're going to give them to represent their layers. And as they go through and put them in, I'll say, okay, this is the R, this is the bedrock, this is our C layer, our B layer, our A layer, and our O layer. I will have them put each of them in, and then I will explain to them what they are. Again, at this point, most of my students don't know anything about soil. I personally teach land judging freshman and sophomore year, so maybe my sophomores have a general idea. They've seen it before, but my freshmen have no idea. They're like, oh, these are the pudding cups that I used to make in kindergarten or used to get at church. And so it's also a good conversation piece to say, okay, the O layer is our organic matter. What does organic matter do? And see what students know. Also, students always love to eat something. So I think this is a great lesson to kind of get them engaged. To do this virtually, I think you could do the same thing. I would, again, just have them pick up their own ingredients and have them layer them, and then describe and talk about each of those layers. If you don't want to have your students go run through their kitchens, even drawing it out and creating that model to explain and show it could also kind of do the same thing. Obviously, you're not going to have as much of that hands-on interaction, but I think that it will get the message and the point across of our soil layers there. All right, so on to the elementary lesson. We took this same format of we are creating a soil horizon, and we're going to talk about each of the layers, but we made it into an elementary lesson. The big focus of the elementary lesson is to build a model, to see if they can describe what the difference between soil and dirt is and why it would be important. From an elementary standpoint, I don't focus very much on Tell me what the A horizon does. Tell me what the B horizon does. Tell me what the C horizon does. Why does organic matter? Especially because they might not know some of those things, but they're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I get to eat pudding. This is such a great day. So one way after Jenny and I have made this lesson that I think that this could be implemented, this would be a great FFA week activity. I know for me and my chapter, we typically will do classroom visits, and within those classroom visits, they do some sort of activity that is related to ag. This would be a great way to implement this. One, the students are getting food, which whenever there's food, everybody is excited. Two, they're going to learn a little bit about their soil, which whether or not your kids come from a production agriculture background, soil is important to all of us, and helping our students realize that from a younger age is always beneficial. Three, I think that if you use these group reflection questions, you can get some really great conversation starters going. So like, for example, what was the hardest part of making your model? You know, some kids might say it was crushing the Oreos or putting the pudding in. And, you know, you could compare and contrast everybody's models to why one might have more pudding than of one layer than the other. And to get that interaction between the kids, also the interaction between the kids and your high school students. Again, I personally don't teach elementary ag, but I know that there are some ag teachers out there that do, and this would be a great lesson to do for that. Again, I think it would be great. I think it would be cool. However, knowing that I'm a one teacher program and there's only one of me, I don't know if I would ever be able to fit it into my schedule. But being able to go into the elementary, we try to go in about once a month and do some of these elementary lessons, or during FFA week, they are implemented that way. And so,
Mercedes,
yeah.
we did just have one question that popped, and the person, thank you so much for writing in, so that they love this idea for hands-on, and they are wondering what other hands-on soil experience do you do in class, perhaps, to also kind of go deeper into teaching your horizons and your soils.
Yeah, great question. So in South Dakota, we actually have a land judging contest or a soils contest. And so I really use this as like my first piece to do soils. Besides this, after this, they would go into, we would talk about like soil texturing. And one lesson I do that if you want it, I can totally get it to you. I have my students make soil. So we look at the soil texture triangle. I really wish I was on the computer so I could just pull it up for you. But we look at the soil texture triangle and we'll say, okay, 33% clay, 33% sand, and 33% silt makes clay, because that, or loam, because that would be our even number. So my peanut butter is going to be clay. I have brown sugar, which is sand, and I usually use cocoa powder as my silt. And I have them mix that up into a cup that says, okay, I think this is about 30, 3 even pieces. Get it to as close as 33% as possible. I have had them measure it out in grams. However, I don't think it necessarily needs to be that precise. And then I'll have another student make, 20% silt, 60% sand, and 30% clay. I don't know if that would add up on the triangle, but and then have them mix, and then, so I'll have a class of 10. So we'll have 10 different soil types, and I will have them each in a cup, and we'll lay them out. And then I'll have each of them look at them and determine the differences between them. So the clay soil should have more peanut butter in them. So they should look different than our soils that are going to have more brown sugar in them. And so that's kind of one way that I do soil classifications. Besides soil classifications, we do a lot of using that land judging scorecard rubric. And so we will do soil texturing. I have students bring in their soil from their houses or wherever. I just tell them to bring me a bag of like a gallon bag of soil, and we're going to soil texture it and figure out what the texture would be. We do that after we've already looked at the soil classifications. And so these kind of all three, I guess, fall into place. So I would start with the soil horizons. Then we would do soil classifications using the peanut butter, brown sugar, and cocoa powder. Then we would use actual soil to do soil texturing. Does that make sense? And so there's kind of a sequence to that. I really like to keep the kids up and moving if at all possible.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If not, Jenny has my email and you can email me individually and I will definitely try to help explain that a little bit more.
When we go back to the PowerPoint too, Mercedes' email will be shared on the last slide, and I'll make sure to leave that slide up for a little bit so everybody who wants it or needs it can copy that down.
Okay, so we're going to slide over to my last slide on plant germination. Again, in my program, you either are going to take plant science, it's plants/animal science. I focus more on plant science, or you're going to be in the shop. Again, I have only done this lesson in person. I had it planned out to do it online, but we haven't had to be online yet. And so if you would do this one online, it would take a little bit of modification on your part. So Jenny, can you pull up the PDF just so they can kind of see a little bit of what the lab is? So this would be a plant germination lab. I have a small greenhouse that we use for this, and then the students will also place them around the room. And so what they're going to do is they're going to pick their seeds, determine what each of their, sorry, I lost my spot, determine what they are going to use as their activity. So they're going to come up with a hypothesis. If I plant this in sunlight, then, oh, sorry. If sunlight is needed to grow, then the plants will grow more quickly in 3 weeks in direct sunlight versus indirect sunlight. I covered this after we do our basic plant science. So what is photosynthesis? What is transpiration? What is respiration? What do plants need to grow? Students are then going to create their own hypothesis and be split into groups. I have a partial sunlight group, an LED light group, a light only, and then total darkness. This one I have expanded it over 3 weeks just because the germination rates of some plants are slower than others. I do let the students typically pick their own seeds. And so also because it just gives us a little bit of a variation of what is shown or what that germination rate. And so what they'll do is they will plant their seeds and they will evaluate them for 21 days. So each day they will see, yep, this one's grown, yep, this one hasn't. I don't let them start saying that they have germinated until they pop up through the soil. I do know that germination happens before that. I do know that students know that germination happens before that. However, it's really, really hard to determine how much they have germinated until they are above the soil. And I don't want students pulling seeds in and out because that would ruin the germination rates there. And so then what I do is once that seed has popped out of the soil, my students are going to start measuring its growth. And so if you go down to the very last slide, Jenny, I think that there's a table there, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And so each group will have their own. Again, in big classes, I split them into 4 different groups. I have done this in my small groups of 6 to 7. With this year's class, I have 7. And so I just split them into 2 groups, and then both of those groups did 1, 2, 3, and 4. So
Mercedes,
they did.
one quick question that just came in is what kind of plants are you using for this? Or what seeds?
Seeds. So typically I let my students pick, typically it's vegetables. So pumpkins, I have had students use tomatoes, and we had one student try to use flowers. It didn't work very well because the seeds were really, really small. And so typically I have found that like pumpkins or bean seeds are going to work better because they are a little bigger and students can make sure that they only get 1 seed per spot or 1 seed per area.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And so then they're going to watch these for 21 days, determine their growth, and then go back to their hypothesis and determine whether or not their hypothesis is right. One thing that my students personally struggle with, and I have talked to other ag teachers, I don't know if this is for everybody, but my students don't see ag as science. Ag is ag. I'm just going to plant and get it done with. They don't necessarily see the scientific side of it. And so I really try to add that in to my lessons whenever I can. And so using the scientific method, they're going to have to write me an if then statement, hypothesis. They're going to have to write me a conclusion to kind of follow that through that way. So back to modifications. Jenny, can you go back to the PowerPoint, please?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. So I, again, haven't done this lesson in person. However, I have thought about this a little bit and how I would modify it if I had the choice to. One thing that we would have to be mindful of is, are students able to pick up supplies from school? Can I make sure that all of my students have all of the supplies they need? Do they have dirt? Do they have seeds? Do we have pots? What are we going to use to put soil in? So if students could get supplies, I would just set this up so each student would have their own supplies. If students cannot get supplies, we might have to be a little bit creative. So if I don't necessarily have supplies, what other things in their house, like maybe if I can get them seeds, what could they use as pots? I live in South Dakota, as Jenny said, so right now it's winter. My students, it would probably be pretty cold outside to go and get some, like dig the ground and get some dirt. And so I wouldn't do this lesson right now in January. I'd probably wait till March or April when it's a little bit warmer outside. So if I can't get them potting soil, at least they could get a little bit of dirt from their backyard or somewhere else to try to do this lesson. Now, if students can't get seeds, there are a lot of virtual apps that would allow you to do something like this. However, I don't think that it's the same. And I really, really try to, again, give students those hands-on activities. Also, another thing, this could very easily be modified for the time frame. 3 weeks is a long time. 3 weeks is a really long time to keep freshmen on an assignment or on a project. And so, you know, if you don't have 3 weeks, make it a week and a half. I would struggle to say go any less than a week because you're not going to see those germination rates. And so that's something that you will have to be mindful of. And you might not see anything happen. But I think that overall, this is something that could be done virtually. It would just take quite a bit of planning up front on the teacher's part. Personally, I think that if you were to do this virtually, or if I was to do this virtually, I would, one, try to get the students the supplies that they would need. So do they have pots? Can I get them seeds? If I can't get them that stuff, what can I use instead? Can they use their neighbors? Does one of their neighbors have a garden that they could get seeds from? Or anything like that. It would just be a lot of upfront you having to talk to your students and seeing what supplies they have there. I think anything else, Jenny? Any other questions? I believe that's all of the lessons. Is there anything else you want me to touch over?
No other questions have come in yet. So if anybody does have a question, now is a great time to write in for those questions. I'll also put up Mercedes' contact information here. So if you do have any questions that pop in your brain after today, Mercedes generously offered to share this. So she would be happy to answer any of those questions. And also, Mercedes, so you know as well, because we broadcast this nationally, we have a number of teachers who will be watching this, of course, at a later time because we send out those recordings to everybody who registered. So if you have any questions and you're watching this after the fact, that also is a good option.
Yeah. The email was probably the best way to get a hold of me, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.
It is certainly a crazy year. But thank you so much for sharing these lessons and also adding the tips and tricks on how to take them virtual, because of course with this year, many of us are changing, where we're working and on a certain day even. It seems to be an ever-changing, ever-evolving school year. So, but do download those handouts. And if you are looking for more AFNR lessons, just to let everyone know, we do have on the Nasco Education website an AFNR section on the free lesson plans and activities. So anywhere on nascoeducation.com, scroll down to that bottom bar, and then you'll find Mercedes lessons here, as well as a number of other AFNR teachers that we worked with in order to kind of start our section. And you can see we have a fair number of offered so far, but also probably again this summer we'll start recruiting for more AFNR lessons. So if you're a teacher who's watching today and you're thinking, I've got a similar lesson plan, or I've got, a lesson plan I really enjoy doing, please do put that in the survey. I would love to talk to you more about that, and then maybe have you presenting on one of these one day. So no other questions came in. So I want to thank you, Mercedes, for your time, and thank everybody for watching today. We do have an ongoing series. So tomorrow is our next webinar that Nasco Education is offering. It's at 9 a.m. Central, so it's kind of an early morning one. But again, the topic is on social emotional learning. So especially if you're interested in social emotional learning and are in a private school setting, we're having a roundtable of private school educators talking about SEL and the development of character when you're in a private school. But that is an ongoing series. We're inviting on panels of educators to talk about social emotional learning. So check out our entire list of those webinars. We also regularly have STEM and STEAM, as well as art and literacy webinars as well. So we would love to see you at any of those. And as I mentioned, there will be a survey that launches as soon as this closes. Please do take the time to fill that out. It helps us plan out our webinar series. And let us know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, thank you so much, Mercedes, for sharing your expertise and your passion. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing these ideas. And we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yep. Bye.